Welcome. This is a special presentation of the Conservative Political Network, cpnlive.com. Here's your host, Tom Brush.
Good afternoon. Welcome to cpnlive.com. I'm Tom Brush. I'll be your host. 2008 was kind of a wild and maybe even a bad year for a lot of people in the United States and around the world. We saw a financial collapse. We've seen unemployment. We've seen disease. We've seen maybe political directions that a lot of us aren't comfortable with. Well, according to a report produced by our guest this afternoon, things are getting ready to get a whole lot worse. The name of the report is The Shape of Things to Come. The author of that report is Clif. Clif, welcome to cpnlive.com.
Thank you very much.
We have just got done reading your Shape of Things to Come report, Volume 0, Issue Number 2. The report we see is produced by a process known as asymmetric language trend analysis. Can you explain to us what those words mean and how the report's put together?
Sure. It's a little screwy to think about, but we start with the premise that all humans are psychic to some degree, and whether they know it or admit it, it's immaterial. To our way of thinking, they leak out psychic impressions about the future in their choice of language used in day-to-day subjects. And it kind of works this way. There's about 11 to 20,000 words that you might use in the course of any given week. But occasionally, you'll step outside of that 20,000 word group that you would normally use and use some other word that's suitable in a particular regular conversation. It might be about bread baking or gardening or something. And we go along and use software on the internet and collect all these word groups that are outside of your usual lexicon or the usual lexicon associated with that subject, which might be gardening or bread baking. It just doesn't matter. And then we examine the shift of that language over time and make predictions based on the direction of those shifts. And we've done this where we've assigned an emotional quantifier to language so that we can look for emotionally hot words. And what we're basically trying to do is to track emotional trails.
Yep. How long have you been doing this project?
Well, I started coming up with the concept in 92, made the first software in 95 and 96. Took a long time to program all of it because, of course, I had to work at the same time I was doing all of this. And we did our first run in 97 and been doing it pretty much continuously since then. So
you've written all the software yourself then?
Oh, yes. I was a software engineer and a programmer before I got off in this radical linguistics work, yes.
Right. I guess based on that, then you must have thousands of hours of your time put into this.
That's a fair assumption. I was working for over the course of 2 years. I probably got about 4,000 hours in programming the basic 200 or 300 executable files that are used to do the work. We have software servers that sit here, and we give them a list of about 300,000 or 400,000 internet sites that are basically forum where people go and chat about various subjects. Okay. And then within that, we'll also give them a list of maybe 50 or 80,000 words that are emotionally hot and tell them go and find this. And they'll sit there and suck down the internet for a while and compile this giant list of words, which we shove off into a SQL Server database. And then I've got all these Prolog programs that go and hit that database and sort and root around and make assumptions and bring me back all of these words in sort of a picture, and we look for where the picture changes on a week-to-week basis and concentrate on those words, and then make certain assumptions. It's been remarkably accurate in making forecasts.
It's kind of a neat project. I mean, I come from a technology and a software background, and I think that's one of the things that fascinated me about the report. It seemed like a pretty interesting way to put a finger on the pulse of what people are thinking around the world, and the projection or the prediction element is kind of interesting too.
That was sort of an outgrowth of a mistake, really, or not a mistake, but an interesting side effect, because initially the idea was that I would aim this software at particular stocks or companies, and I was working on the premise that I'd be able to sell the software to those people that make their living off of trading stocks back and forth.
Sure.
Because the idea was that it finally dawned on me, after, 40 years on this planet, oh geez, the stock market isn't driven by rational thought, it's driven by emotion. And these people get all whipped up about stocks, and they have no real reason to it, they just do for whatever reason. And I thought, well, if I could assign an emotional value to regular words and then pick them up relative to a stock, I would find out which stocks were going to be emotionally hot ahead of time and could buy or sell based on that knowledge. Not that I would know what I was doing because I was a doofus in that regard, but I figured, well, somebody who does know what they're doing might want to buy this software. It might give them an edge. So that was my narrow focus. But it went awry because the first time I ran it against this company called Sun, which was Stanford University Network.
Right.
But instead I got all this information about the Sun itself and all of these worry words associated with it. It painted such a strange picture that I got involved in that and forgot all about the stock business.
Kind of an interesting sidetrack there. One thing I was curious about, I know there's a gentleman named Martin Armstrong who did a bunch of predictive cycle work, and he's actually in jail right now because I think one of the three-letter agencies from our government wanted to exclusively purchase his software, and he refused, and they've thrown him in jail for contempt. Have you ever been approached by agencies or entities like that to try to scoop up your software to derive the benefits of it?
No, we initially, way back when, in a fit of patriotism, I offered to sell the concept to, in this broad agency announcement thing. George Ure was this guy who has been involved with it, with me and runs urbansurvival.com.
Okay.
He suggested that we put in for some money and refine this, and it never went anywhere, but no, no one from any official level of government or anything else has ever come and said, hey, we want to purchase this. Probably because it's way too weird. It's a little on the woo-woo side, and they've probably got enough issues without going that far into the woo-woo world.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to refer to a few things that we read in the last report here. Just got it last week. I guess it was published back on September 15th. One thing that I was not real familiar with, I mean, I've seen the concept of race wars and how people who are trying to control the populations would play one race against each other or one nation against each other, and there's this kind of divide and conquer strategy. But in your report, you were talking about a 15% meme, and some people they're trying to cause some people to believe that they're in an elite class, and I hadn't heard of that specifically, and I was wondering if you could discuss that a little bit and kind of give us an example of that type of thing.
Well, what they're going to do is the powers that be find themselves in a peculiar situation where there's a rising mass of awareness, political, social, theoretical, however you want to look at it. The truth movement, whatever name you care to put on it, is in essence a threat to their ability to dominate and control the planet. So they use the Hegelian dialectic of creating a problem and then creating and offering a solution that you go for, or basically a divide and conquer approach.
Right.
And what they're doing is they're trying to find those people, or they want to create a group whereby those people that come into an awareness of how things are progressing on this planet would naturally self-identify. And so they came up with this idea that, it turns out that theoretically some 15% of the populace of the planet has alien DNA in their DNA. They're like special hybrids or whatever. And it's across all races and cultures and so on, and it just doesn't matter where you are. Your 15% of the populace was part of this alien hybrid experiment. And they're going to use that as a means of slicing and dicing the populace for their use later on. The idea being that a lot of people, they're going to be told that this is why, for instance, that you're awake and aware is because you have 15% alien DNA and therefore you're resistant to mind control. And that's why you see through all of the hidden techniques that the powers that be are using on everyone else. And it could be true. Who knows? It just does not matter if it's true or not. The fact is that the powers that be are going to use this as a self-selecting, categorizing mechanism to get people to opt into a special group, which can then be controlled and manipulated towards their end.
Are there any kind of examples of that type of thing that are visible right now that you could look to?
There are examples. You'll see it in various different forms within, like for instance, some subsets of the New Age movement, some subsets of the radical fundamentalism, both Christian or actually, for that matter, Jewish or Muslim. It doesn't matter. A lot of those groups that want to identify themselves as separate from the larger mass of sheeple that just can't understand why everybody else doesn't see what they see are being targeted with this idea that, oh, well, you're special because, you can see this through this. It means you're not subjected to the mind control, you're resistant to it, and that's because you have this 15% DNA and you're special, therefore, blah, blah, blah. The idea being, of course, that the powers that be who are doing all the mind control have a greater percentage of alien DNA, so you ought to go along with them because you're more akin to them than you are to the rest of humanity.
What are they going to use that once they've established this train of thought or paradigm or whatever? What are they going to use that to do then?
Well, presumably they're going to use it at a period of stress to recruit more minions to saving the butts of the powers that be at the time that the rest of the planet gets a little bit uppity.
Dicey, okay. That kind of makes sense. I see that in the report, that kind of dovetails into the next section where there's talk of problems with the oceans and food production, maybe disease, obviously the swine flu and other types of diseases, and then financial problems all happening at the same time. Is that the kind of situation that they're trying to beef up against? I mean, do they see this coming, or have they created it, or?
I wouldn't go so far as to provide a cause and an effect relationship between the individuals of the powers that be and all of the problems that beset us.
Sure.
Because there's clearly many that are beyond their level of control.
Right.
All of our solar system, for instance, is experiencing upheaval at a very core level, whether you want to call it, planetary heating or interplanetary heating or warming or whatever. The sun and all of the associated planets, ours included, are suffering effects that are not man-made and are clearly on, if not catastrophic, border on it. And the powers that be also have known this for a number of years, and there's evidence they've been preparing for it since the 1940s. I don't believe they cause it in any way, shape, or form. Now, they could have indeed done things, and may have indeed done things, to prolong the life of the dollar to its current stage so that it fails at a more convenient time for them. But again, the dollar was due to fail simply because paper currency has a finite lifespan. It can only exist so long as it has ability to obtain or incur debt on it, and we've used up the ability to put debt on our dollar. So the dollar's going to die regardless. The fact that it's dying at this particular time, at this juxtaposition of events, doesn't bode well for us because we've got all of this stuff hitting us at once. But I don't really say that the powers that be have engineered that. They may have engineered and tweaked some minor aspects of some of the things they can control, but they're like the rest of us. They're riding this planet through a rather nasty period.
Right. I know there's organizations like GATA, G-A-T-A, that talk about evidence of gold manipulation. There's people that talk about a plunge protection team that manipulates stock prices, or the Fed buying bonds. So it's easy to see how in the short run those kinds of things can be influenced. But I would agree that history shows that when you have a fiat currency, it's going to get abused and diluted. And I take it your view from the data and the report is that the value of the dollar is headed south and in the not too distant future. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've reached the ability of the powers that be to stretch out that dollar. The recent huge level of bailouts or infusion of liquidity, in spite of the claims that it can be sanitized and not actually hit the economy, have pretty much finished off the ability of the dollar to absorb debt. And bear in mind, that's really what paper currency is the ability to absorb debt over time. And usually they crash between 58 years and 72 years. Ours has been extended because it is the global reserve currency. It was tied to oil. It had been